It was late afternoon, and the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the city streets in a warm, almost nostalgic light. Standing at the entrance of my restaurant, I found myself lost in thought, reflecting on how far I had come since the days when I was the one hustling for survival on these very streets. The aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces wafted through the air, mixing with the sounds of city life, a symphony I had grown accustomed to over the years. But today, something unusual caught my eye. Across the street, a young boy, no older than 10 or 11, stood alone. He had a small cardboard box strapped around his neck, filled with homemade sweets, caramels, fudge, and some brightly wrapped candies that looked like they were meant for better days. His clothes were worn, his sneakers scuffed, but it was the look in his eyes that held my attention. There was a determination there, a resilience that I knew all too well. The boy moved from person to person, politely asking if they wanted to buy something. Most people hurried past, too engrossed in their own lives to notice him. A few spared a glance, but no one stopped. As I watched him, memories of my own childhood flashed before me. The nights I spent on these streets, hungry and desperate, trying to sell anything I could just to make it to the next day. Without really thinking, I stepped outside, crossing the street towards him. He didn't see me at first, too focused on his task. When I was close enough, I crouched down to his level and cleared my throat softly. "Hey, kid," I said gently. "What's your name?" Startled, he looked up at me, his brown eyes wide with a mix of surprise and wariness. "Jacob," he replied, his voice steady but guarded. "Jacob, huh? Nice to meet you. I'm Oliver," I introduced myself, offering him a small smile. "You're selling sweets?" He nodded, glancing down at his box. "Yes, sir. Would you like to buy some?" His voice was polite, almost too polite for a boy his age, like he had learned to mask his desperation with courtesy. I looked at the sweets, but my focus was on the boy himself. "I'll tell you what, Jacob. How about you come inside my restaurant and have a meal with me instead?" His eyes flickered with uncertainty, as if he wasn't sure if he could trust me. "I don't have any money," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "You don't need any money. The meal's on me. You've been working hard all day. Why don't you take a break?" He hesitated, clearly torn between the offer of a meal and his sense of responsibility. "I need to sell these. For my mom," he explained, his eyes dropping to the ground. The way he said it struck a chord with me. I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You can take a break for one meal. I promise, it'll be worth it." After a moment, Jacob nodded, the resolve in his eyes softening. "Okay. Thank you, Mr. Oliver." I stood up and led him across the street, back to my restaurant. As we stepped inside, the warmth of the place enveloped us, a stark contrast to the cool evening air outside. The hostess gave me a curious look as I guided Jacob to a quiet table by the window. "2 plates of spaghetti, please," I told her with a smile, and she nodded, disappearing into the kitchen. Jacob sat down, still holding onto his box of sweets as if it were a lifeline. I noticed how he kept glancing around, taking in the sights and smells of the restaurant. "This place is really nice," he said after a moment, his voice filled with genuine awe. "Thank you," I replied. "It's been a lot of hard work, but it's all worth it." As we waited for the food, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of familiarity with this boy. There was something about him that reminded me of myself at his age, something in the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, that made me feel like our paths had crossed for a reason. When the food arrived, Jacob's eyes lit up at the sight of the steaming plate of spaghetti. He hesitated for just a second before digging in, and I watched with a smile as he ate with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. "This is amazing," he mumbled between bites, a small smile breaking through his earlier caution. "I'm glad you like it," I said. "You deserve it, Jacob. You've been working hard." He paused for a moment, looking up at me. "Why did you invite me in?" he asked, his voice quiet but curious. I leaned back in my chair, considering my answer. Because, Jacob, I see a lot of myself in you. And sometimes, a little kindness can go a long way. Jacob seemed to mull that over, nodding slowly as he returned to his meal. As we sat there, eating in comfortable silence, I knew this was just the beginning of something bigger, something that would change both of our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. As Jacob finished his meal, the tension that had been visible in his small frame seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet calm. The restaurant was beginning to fill up with the evening crowd, the soft hum of conversations blending with the clinking of cutlery. But our corner of the room felt insulated from the bustle, like a quiet haven where time moved a little slower. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table, and gave Jacob a reassuring smile. "So, Jacob," I began gently, "you mentioned you're selling sweets for your mom. Tell me more about that." Jacob hesitated, his fingers nervously fidgeting with the strap of his box. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wasn't used to sharing his burdens, especially not with strangers. But after a moment, he took a deep breath and met my gaze. "It's just me and my mom," he started, his voice quiet but steady. "Ever since my dad died, it's been really hard. Mom got sick not long after, and she hasn't been able to work. I try to help out as much as I can. Selling sweets is one of the few things I can do to make some money." His words were simple, but the weight of them hit me like a punch to the gut. I could see how much he was carrying on those young shoulders, the responsibility far too heavy for someone his age. "How old are you, Jacob?" I asked, my voice softer now, filled with concern. 11, he replied, his gaze dropping to the table. "I'm in the 6th grade, but I don't get to go to school every day. Sometimes I have to stay home to take care of my mom or sell sweets to pay for her medicine." There was a quiet determination in his voice that reminded me so much of myself at his age. I had been in his shoes once, forced to grow up too fast, to be the man of the house long before I was ready. "Jacob, that's a lot for you to handle," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as my heart ached for him. "What about your family? Is there anyone else who can help?" He shook his head, his expression resigned. "We don't have anyone else. My grandparents passed away before I was born, and my dad was an only child. It's just us." I nodded, understanding the depth of his isolation. "What about your friends? Do they know what you're going through?" Jacob hesitated again, then shrugged. "Some of them do, but it's hard to explain. They don't really understand, and I don't want them to feel sorry for me. Besides, most of them have their own problems. It's just easier to keep it to myself." His words broke my heart. No child should have to face the world alone like this, yet Jacob was doing it with a quiet strength that was both admirable and heartbreaking. I could see that he was proud of the little he could do for his mother, but I also saw the exhaustion and fear that he was trying so hard to hide. "What about your mom?" I asked gently. "How is she holding up?" Jacob's expression softened at the mention of his mother. "She tries to stay strong for me, but I know she's in a lot of pain. The medicine helps, but it's expensive, and we can't always afford it. She worries about me more than she should. I keep telling her I'm fine, but sometimes I'm not." His voice cracked on that last sentence, and I could see the tears he was fighting to hold back. My heart ached for him, and I felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, to make this better for him. "Jacob," I said, reaching across the table to place a hand on his, "you're doing everything you can, and that's more than most people your age would even think to do. But you don't have to do this alone. There are people who can help, and I want to be one of them." He looked up at me, a mixture of hope and skepticism in his eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you want to help us?" I took a deep breath, knowing that the time had come to share a piece of my own story. "Because I've been where you are, Jacob. When I was about your age, I was homeless. My parents were gone, and I had no one to turn to. I was lost, until someone took a chance on me, showed me kindness, and helped me get back on my feet. Her name was Grace. At the mention of her name, something flickered in Jacob's eyes, but he didn't say anything. I continued, feeling the weight of the memories as they resurfaced. Grace was the first person who believed in me. She gave me a job, taught me how to cook, and more importantly, she showed me that I was worth saving. I've never forgotten that, and I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to pay it forward, I would. And now, here you are, Jacob. I see so much of myself in you, and I know how hard it is to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. But you don't have to do it alone. Not anymore. Jacob was silent for a long moment, processing everything I had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. What happened to Grace? I smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. We lost touch a few years ago. Life took us in different directions, but I've always hoped to find her again, to thank her for everything she did for me. Jacob looked down at the table, his expression thoughtful. My mom's name is Grace, he said quietly. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt a strange, almost eerie sense of connection. Could it be? Could his mother be the same Grace who had saved me all those years ago? The possibility sent a shiver down my spine, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Not yet. Would you like to bring your mom here for dinner sometime? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. I'd love to meet her, and we can talk more about how I can help. Jacob looked up at me, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. I think she'd like that, he said, his voice stronger now. Thank you, Mr. Oliver. I don't know how to thank you enough. You don't have to thank me, Jacob, I replied, smiling warmly at him. Just promise me one thing. Keep being the amazing kid you are. And don't ever lose that hope. You're going to do great things, I can feel it. He nodded, and for the first time since I had met him, I saw a genuine smile break across his face, a smile filled with hope, and the possibility of a brighter future. As we said our goodbyes and Jacob left the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling that our lives were about to change in ways neither of us could have predicted. And deep down, I knew that the next chapter of our stories had just begun. The sun had set by the time I returned to my office, the restaurant humming with the sounds of evening service. The meeting with Jacob had stirred up memories I hadn't revisited in years, memories I usually kept tucked away in the furthest corners of my mind. But now, as I sat in the quiet of my office, the past seemed to creep up on me, insistent and unavoidable. I reached for the old weathered photo frame on my desk, the one I rarely let anyone see. Inside was a picture of a much younger version of myself, standing in front of a small, run-down diner with a woman who had an infectious smile and eyes that seemed to see right through you. Grace, the woman who had saved me, who had given me a second chance when I had nothing left. Her diner was nothing special by the world's standards. A little place off a busy road, frequented mostly by truckers and locals who appreciated good, hearty food. But to me, it was a haven. I had been a scared, angry kid, too proud to ask for help, but too desperate to refuse it when it was offered. I had been wandering the streets, hungry and cold, when I stumbled into her diner one night, hoping to escape the bitter chill outside. I could still remember that first meeting like it was yesterday. Grace had taken one look at me, shivering in my thin jacket, and without a word, she had brought me a bowl of soup. It was the first hot meal I'd had in days, and as I ate, she sat across from me, her eyes filled with a kindness I hadn't known in a long time. "Where are your folks, kid?" she had asked me, her voice gentle but probing. I hadn't wanted to answer her at first. It wasn't anyone's business, I had thought. And besides, what did she care? But something about the way she looked at me made me feel like I could trust her, like she genuinely wanted to help. "They're gone," I had muttered, staring down at the bowl of soup. "My mom died a few years ago, and my dad, well, he left a long time before that." Grace had nodded, not pushing for more details. "I'm sorry to hear that," she had said softly. "It's a tough world out there, especially when you're on your own." I had just shrugged, trying to act like it didn't bother me. But she saw right through it. "What's your name?" she had asked, changing the subject. "Oliver," I had replied, not looking up from my soup. "Well, Oliver," she had said with a small smile, "you're welcome to stay here as long as you need to. We can always use an extra set of hands around the place." That had been the start of everything. Grace didn't just give me food and a place to stay. She gave me a purpose. She taught me how to cook, how to run a kitchen, and most importantly, how to believe in myself again. She became the family I had lost, the one person who saw potential in me when no one else did. The memory was so vivid, I could almost hear her voice in the room with me. I let out a deep sigh and leaned back in my chair, staring at the photo. What would she think if she saw me now, sitting in this fancy office, the owner of a restaurant that people traveled miles to visit? I liked to think she'd be proud, but I also knew she'd give me that look, the one that said she was happy for me, but that I better not have forgotten where I came from. A knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. "Come in," I called, quickly placing the photo back on my desk. Rachel, my restaurant manager, poked her head in. "Sorry to interrupt, Oliver," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "Is everything okay? You've been in here for a while." I forced a smile, nodding. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just thinking about some old stuff." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Is it about that boy? The one you had dinner with?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes and no." Jacob reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone who helped me when I was about his age. Rachel sat down across from me, her expression curious. "You've never really talked much about your past, Oliver. I mean, we all know you didn't come from money, but you've kept the details pretty close to the chest." I nodded, running a hand through my hair. "It's not something I talk about often, but meeting Jacob today, it brought back a lot of memories." Rachel waited patiently, sensing that I needed to get something off my chest. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "I wasn't always this successful," I said, my voice steady but filled with the weight of old pain. "In fact, there was a time when I had nothing. My mom died when I was young, and my dad, he was never in the picture. I ended up on the streets, trying to survive any way I could." Rachel's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I continued, feeling the story spill out of me like water from a dam. I was angry, lost, and completely alone. But then, I met Grace. She ran this little diner, and she took me in when I had nowhere else to go. She gave me a job, taught me how to cook, and more importantly, she gave me hope. Without her, I don't know where I'd be today. Rachel smiled softly. "She sounds like an incredible woman." She was, I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And now, years later, I meet this boy, Jacob. He's going through something so similar to what I did, and I can't help but think this is my chance to repay the kindness Grace showed me." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've always had a big heart, Oliver. It doesn't surprise me that you'd want to help Jacob. But it's more than that, isn't it? This is personal." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "It is. When I look at Jacob, I see myself. And when he mentioned his mother's name, Grace, I couldn't believe it. What are the odds that his mom could be the same Grace who saved me all those years ago?" Rachel's eyes widened. "Do you really think it could be her?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I need to find out. I owe it to both of them." There was a silence between us as the weight of my words settled in the room. Rachel finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "Whatever happens, Oliver, you're doing the right thing. Helping Jacob and his mom. It's what Grace would have wanted." I nodded, feeling a sense of resolve harden within me. "You're right. It's time to face the past, and maybe, just maybe, set things right." As Rachel left the room, I picked up the photo again, staring into Grace's eyes. "I'm coming for you, Grace," I whispered to the picture. "Wherever you are, I'm going to find you. And this time, it's my turn to help." The promise hung in the air, and I knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges and emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. But I was ready. For Jacob, for his mother, and for the woman who had given me a second chance at life. It was time to repay the debt that had shaped me into the man I had become. The evening after my encounter with Jacob, I couldn't shake the sense of urgency that had taken hold of me. I needed to act quickly, to reach out to Grace before any more time passed. My mind was consumed with the thought of reconnecting with the woman who had changed my life, and I wanted to do it in a way that would honor the kindness she had shown me. The restaurant was quiet after the dinner rush, the staff winding down and preparing for the next day. I found myself in the dining area, walking among the empty tables as I contemplated my plan. The place had always been more than just a restaurant to me. It was a symbol of my journey, my transformation. And now, it was about to become the setting for a reunion that felt as though it was long overdue. I went back to my office, sat behind my desk, and took out my phone. I needed to find Grace. I wasn't sure if she would remember me, or if she would even be alive after all these years, but I had to try. I reached out to old contacts, hoping someone could point me in the right direction. "Hello," a voice answered after several rings. "Hi, this is Oliver Reed. I'm looking for someone who used to run a diner a few decades ago. Her name is Grace. Do you know if she's still around?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. The voice on the other end paused, as if considering the request. "Grace? That's a common name. Do you have any more details?" She ran a small diner on the outskirts of town. She took me in when I was a kid. I just want to find her and invite her to my restaurant, I explained. There was a long pause before the voice responded. "Grace. I remember her. She did make quite an impression on many of us. Let me check my records. Hold on." I waited impatiently, the minutes ticking by slowly. Finally, the voice returned. "I have an address for a Grace Miller. It's an old address, but it's worth a try. I'll send it to you via text." "Thank you so much," I said, relief flooding through me. "I really appreciate your help." The next morning, I set out to find Grace's old address. The neighborhood had changed over the years, but the house was still standing, a modest home with a well-kept garden. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding with anticipation. An elderly woman answered the door, her face lined with age, but still radiating warmth. "Can I help you? Are you Grace Miller?" I asked, hoping beyond hope. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath, my emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Grace, my name is Oliver Reed. You may not remember me, but you took me in years ago when I was in a tough spot. You taught me how to cook, gave me a place to stay. You saved me." Grace's eyes filled with tears as she took in my words. "Oliver? My goodness, it's been so long. I do remember you. You were just a boy back then. I never expected to hear from you again." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. "I've wanted to find you for years. I want to thank you properly. I'd like to invite you and Jacob, the boy I met recently, to dinner at my restaurant. I owe you so much, Grace." Her face softened, a mix of surprise and joy. "That's very kind of you, Oliver. I'm sure Jacob would love that. It's been a while since we've had a reason to celebrate." "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "Let's set a date. How about this weekend?" Grace nodded, her eyes still shimmering with emotion. "That sounds wonderful. Thank you for reaching out. It means a lot to me." Back at the restaurant, I was a bundle of nervous energy, ensuring every detail was perfect for the special evening. The staff was briefed on the importance of the night, and I personally oversaw the preparations, making sure that everything, from the food to the ambience, was just right. As the time approached for Grace and Jacob to arrive, I paced the dining room, anticipation building. Finally, the moment came. Grace and Jacob walked through the door, their faces lighting up as they took in the elegant setting. "Oliver," Grace exclaimed, her voice filled with genuine happiness. "It's beautiful." "Welcome," I said, greeting them warmly. "I'm so glad you could make it." Jacob looked around, eyes wide with wonder. "This place is amazing." "I'm glad you think so," I said, smiling at him. "Please, let's sit and enjoy a meal together." We settled at a table, and I watched as Grace and Jacob took in the restaurant's surroundings. As we began to eat, Grace's eyes never left me, a mixture of pride and emotion evident in her gaze. "I never imagined," she said softly, "that you would come so far. Seeing you now, it's truly incredible." "I owe it all to you," I replied, my voice steady but full of gratitude. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. Tonight is about honoring that." The evening was filled with laughter and heartfelt conversation. As we shared stories and reminisced, it became clear how much our lives had intertwined in unexpected ways. The connection was profound, bridging the gap of time and distance that had separated us. As the night drew to a close, Grace looked at me with a smile that spoke volumes. "Thank you, Oliver, for everything." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "It was my pleasure, Grace. And if there's anything you need from me, just let me know." Jacob, sitting next to his mother, looked up with a grin. "This was the best night ever." I chuckled, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I'm glad to hear that, Jacob." As they prepared to leave, Grace took my hand and squeezed it gently. "You've made an old woman very happy tonight." "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "It means more to me than you could know." As Grace and Jacob left the restaurant, I felt a profound sense of closure and gratitude. The past had come full circle, and I had finally been able to repay the kindness that had once saved me. It was a night I would always remember, a testament to the power of compassion and the unexpected ways life can bring people back together. The atmosphere in the restaurant was electric with anticipation as the evening of Grace and Jacob's dinner approached. I had made sure that every detail was meticulously arranged, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional surge I felt as I saw Grace and Jacob approaching the entrance. I stood by the host station, trying to keep my composure, but my heart raced with excitement. The familiar sight of Grace and Jacob walking through the doors was like a scene from a long-forgotten dream coming to life. Grace, elegant yet humble, and Jacob, with his wide eyes filled with wonder, made their way to the reserved table. "Good evening, Grace," I greeted warmly, stepping forward with a smile. "Jacob, it's great to see you both." Grace's eyes met mine, and she smiled with a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Thank you for having us, Oliver. This place is truly magnificent." "It's my pleasure," I said, guiding them to their table. "Please, make yourselves comfortable." As they settled into their seats, I noticed Grace glancing around, her gaze taking in the restaurant's opulent decor. The memory of her kindness and the many lessons I had learned from her were vivid in my mind. I could hardly wait to share this special moment with her. The dinner began, and the restaurant's ambience created a perfect setting for the evening. The staff was attentive, ensuring that every course was served to perfection. I watched from a distance, occasionally glancing over to see Grace and Jacob enjoying the meal. They seemed at ease, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction seeing them happy. Halfway through the dinner, I approached their table to check in and share a few words. "How is everything?" I asked, my gaze shifting between Grace and Jacob. "It's wonderful, Oliver," Grace said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "The food is exquisite, and the atmosphere is just perfect." "I'm so glad to hear that," I said, smiling. "There's something special about tonight, isn't there?" Grace's eyes twinkled with a mix of nostalgia and curiosity. "Yes, it feels like a dream." Jacob, who had been quietly enjoying his meal, suddenly looked up with a thoughtful expression. "Mr. Reed, is there something special about this place? You seem so connected to it." I took a deep breath, feeling the surge of emotion. "Actually, yes. There's a story behind this restaurant that goes back many years. a story that involves someone very important to me. Before I could continue, one of my staff members, a friendly waitress named Lily, approached the table. "Excuse me, Oliver," she said, addressing me. "There's a woman here who says she knows you. She insists on speaking with you right away." A chill ran down my spine. "Who is it?" Lily hesitated for a moment. She didn't give a name, but she mentioned something about the past and a diner. I felt a rush of recognition and a mix of emotions. "Please, show her to my office." Moments later, I was waiting anxiously in my office. The door opened, and in walked a familiar face, one that I had not seen in years but would never forget. It was Grace, my Grace, dressed in the same kind of practical yet caring attire I remembered from my childhood. Her eyes met mine, and a look of shock and recognition passed between us. "Oliver, is it really you?" "Yes, it's me," I replied, my voice catching in my throat. "Grace, I can't believe it. How did you find me?" Grace took a step closer, her eyes glistening with tears. "I heard about this restaurant from a friend. When I saw the name, I felt a pull. I just had to come and see if it was really you." I felt a lump in my throat, unable to suppress my emotions. "I wanted to find you too. I've been hoping to reconnect for years. It's been so long." Grace reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and comforting. "I never expected this. Seeing you now, so successful and kind-hearted, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." I looked into her eyes, seeing the same compassion and strength that had once saved me. "You had a hand in making this possible. Everything I've achieved is because of the second chance you gave me." Meanwhile, at the dinner table, Jacob watched the interaction with wide eyes. He had been curious about my connection to Grace, but hadn't fully grasped the depth of the reunion. I returned to the table with Grace, who looked around with a sense of wonder. "Jacob, I'd like you to meet someone very special," I said, introducing her. Grace looked at Jacob, her eyes softening. "Hello, Jacob. I'm Grace. I'm so glad to finally meet you." Jacob's eyes widened as he looked at Grace. "You're the one Mr. Reed talked about. You helped him when he was a kid." Grace nodded, her emotions evident. "Yes, that's right. And it's so wonderful to see how much he has accomplished." Jacob, overwhelmed by the connection, looked at Grace with admiration. "Thank you for everything you did for him. I've heard so many good things." Grace smiled gently. "And thank you for being such a good son to your mother. It means a lot to me." As the evening progressed, the table became a place of shared memories and heartfelt conversations. Grace and I exchanged stories of the past, while Jacob listened intently, absorbing the depth of the connection that had brought us together. When the night drew to a close, Grace looked at me with gratitude. "Oliver, this has been an incredible evening. I never expected such a reunion. I'm just grateful that we could all be here together," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "It feels like everything has come full circle." As Grace and Jacob prepared to leave, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment and closure. The evening had been a testament to the power of kindness and the unexpected ways in which lives can intersect and change. The reunion was not just a personal moment of reconciliation, but a reminder of the enduring impact of compassion and the importance of never forgetting those who have shaped our lives. The days following the emotional reunion were a whirlwind of activity for me. I found myself reflecting deeply on the debt of gratitude I owed Grace and how best to honor her influence on my life. With every passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I needed to do more than just offer a meal. I had to make a tangible difference in Grace and Jacob's lives. One morning, as I sat in my office, the familiar buzz of the restaurant just beginning to pick up, I picked up the phone and dialed Grace's number. It rang a few times before she answered. "Hello." Grace's voice came through, warm and welcoming. "Hi, Grace, it's Oliver," I said. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Oh, not at all," Grace replied. "I was just preparing some breakfast for Jacob. How can I help you?" "I've been thinking a lot about our recent meeting," I began, and I realized there's so much more I want to do for you both. I'd like to discuss it with you, if you have a moment." There was a pause on the other end. "That sounds intriguing. When would be a good time?" "How about this afternoon?" I suggested. "I'd like to invite you both back to the restaurant for a chat." Grace agreed, and I ended the call with a sense of purpose. I began planning for their visit, preparing to make an offer that I hoped would reflect my gratitude and provide them with the support they needed. Later that day, Grace and Jacob arrived at the restaurant. They were greeted warmly by the staff and shown to a private table in one of the quieter corners. I joined them soon after, bringing with me a selection of pastries and fresh coffee. As we settled in, Grace looked around, her eyes filled with curiosity. "Everything looks so wonderful here, Oliver. You've really created something special." "Thank you, Grace," I said, taking a seat. "I've been reflecting on everything you did for me and realized I haven't done enough to repay you." Grace smiled modestly. "You've already done so much just by reconnecting. I never expected anything more." "That's very kind of you," I replied. "But I want to offer more than just words. I'd like to help you and Jacob in a more concrete way." Jacob looked between us, sensing the gravity of the conversation. "What do you have in mind, Mr. Reed?" I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I'd like to offer you both a place to stay, a fully furnished apartment in one of the buildings I own. It's a comfortable and safe place, and I hope it will make things easier for you." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "Oliver, that's incredibly generous, but we don't want to impose." "It's no imposition at all," I assured her. "It's the least I can do to show my appreciation. You've been a guiding light in my life, and I want to make sure you and Jacob have the stability you deserve." Jacob's eyes lit up, and he looked at Grace with a hopeful expression. "Mom, this could be really good for us." Grace looked at me, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. This is more than we ever expected." "It's my pleasure," I said. "There's also another matter I'd like to discuss. I understand you've been struggling with medical expenses for Jacob's mother. I'd like to help cover those costs. We can discuss the details privately if you prefer." Grace's tears began to fall, and she nodded gratefully. "That would mean the world to us. Thank you, Oliver." I reached out and placed a reassuring hand on hers. "It's the least I can do. You gave me so much, and now it's my turn to give back." As the conversation continued, Grace and Jacob shared more about their current situation and their hopes for the future. I listened intently, determined to find additional ways to assist them. "I also want to offer Jacob a scholarship to a local culinary school," I added. "He has such a passion for cooking, and I'd love to see him pursue that dream." Jacob's face lit up with excitement. "Really? That would be amazing. I've always wanted to learn more about cooking." Grace looked at me with profound gratitude. "You're changing our lives, Oliver. I don't know how to express our thanks. Seeing you both happy and secure is enough for me." I said, "I've been given so much, and it's important to me to share that with others." As the afternoon wore on, we wrapped up our discussion, making plans to finalize the details of the apartment and the scholarship. Grace and Jacob left the restaurant with a renewed sense of hope and optimism. Watching them leave, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The opportunity to repay the kindness I had received was a powerful reminder of the impact one person can have on another's life. It was a small step in the grand scheme of things, but it was one that I hoped would make a significant difference for Grace and Jacob. In the end, repaying a debt was not just about the material assistance. It was about honoring the bond that had been formed through compassion and kindness. And as I continued to reflect on the journey that had brought us together, I felt a profound connection to both my past and the future I hoped to help create for those I cared about. The day of Grace and Jacob's move into the apartment had arrived, and with it came a mix of excitement and bittersweet emotions. The apartment was situated in a charming, well-maintained building just a short distance from the restaurant. I had ensured that it was fully furnished and ready to welcome them with all the comforts they needed. I arrived at the apartment building early, eager to ensure that everything was perfect. I wanted this to be a fresh start for Grace and Jacob, a place where they could find peace and stability. As I approached the apartment, I saw Grace and Jacob pulling up in a small, worn-out car. They looked both nervous and hopeful, their expressions reflecting the magnitude of the transition. "Good morning," I called out as I approached them. "I hope the move is going smoothly." Grace smiled warmly despite the exhaustion. "Good morning, Oliver. It's been a bit overwhelming, but we're managing." Jacob, carrying a box, looked around with wide eyes. "This place looks amazing, Mr. Reed." "I'm glad you think so," I said, helping him with the box. "Let me give you a quick tour before you start unpacking." The apartment was spacious, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light. I showed them around, highlighting the various features and the personal touches I had arranged to make it feel like home. Grace took a deep breath as she looked around the living room. "It's beautiful, Oliver. I can't believe this is all ours." "It's all yours," I affirmed. "I wanted to make sure you both had a place where you could feel comfortable and secure." As we continued the tour, Jacob's excitement grew. He explored the kitchen with enthusiasm. "This kitchen is incredible. I can't wait to start cooking here." "I'm looking forward to seeing what you create," I said with a grin. "And remember, if you ever need any advice or ingredients, you know where to find me." Later that day, I hosted a small welcome dinner for Grace and Jacob at the restaurant. It was a chance for them to celebrate their new beginning and for me to share in their joy. I had arranged for their favorite dishes to be served, and the restaurant was filled with an air of festivity. As we sat down to eat, Grace looked around, her eyes misty with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, Oliver. This is more than we ever expected." "I'm just glad to see you both happy," I said. "You've been through so much, and it's wonderful to see you starting fresh." Jacob raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings, and to Oliver, who made it all possible. Thank you for everything." We clinked glasses, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and camaraderie. The evening was filled with laughter, heartfelt conversations, and a sense of hope for the future. As the dinner wound down, I took Grace aside to speak with her privately. "Grace," I began, "there's one more thing I wanted to discuss with you." She looked at me curiously. "What is it?" "I'd like to offer you a position at the restaurant," I said. "We have a role available that I think you'd be perfect for. It would involve managing some of our community outreach programs and helping with special events." Grace's eyes widened in surprise. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to contribute in any way I can." "I'm glad to hear that," I said. "Your experience and kindness would be a great asset to our team." Jacob joined us, a smile on his face. "Mom, this is amazing. I can't believe how much has changed for us." Grace looked at her son with a tender smile. "It really is a new beginning, Jacob. I'm so grateful for everything." As the evening came to a close, I took a moment to reflect on the journey that had led us here. Helping Grace and Jacob had been one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. It was a chance to give back, to repay the kindness that had once been extended to me. Standing in the restaurant, watching them embrace their new start, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The connection we had forged was more than just a gesture. It was a bond that had transformed all our lives. Grace and Jacob had embarked on a new chapter, one filled with hope, opportunity, and the promise of a brighter future. And as they settled into their new home and embraced their new roles, I knew that their journey had only just begun. In the end, it wasn't just about the material support or the opportunities provided. It was about the shared humanity, the understanding, and the commitment to making a positive difference in each other's lives. And for me, that was the true essence of a new beginning.